NFTs aren't in and of themselves property rights. There's a whole discussion about what they represent. It's not even necessarily ownership, but they are the building blocks. I really believe this. This is this moment, as I said, like a serial number, we can build this. And the thing that I find so striking is if you look back in history, you go back to the Magna Carta of 1215, when the noblemen of, supposed noblemen of England were at war with King John, and they ended up like striking a deal that recognized their rights, and that led to a whole new framework for how we thought about the economy. And then you had in the 1600s the invention of the Dutch East India Company was the first limited stock company. That meant a whole new era of capital formation that came with that. And the one that I think is one of the most striking ones is when Deng Xiaoping in China handed off to Chinese citizens the right to own their home. It was a massive catalyst for essentially the enormous amount of growth that we've seen in China since then. So we've sort of seen this through history, where this moment where a right that didn't exist was conferred to a population, and a tremendous explosion of economic creation happened. So given that the global economy is a digital economy, the idea that we are now on the verge of taking this beginning building block and turning it into that sort of a framework is incredibly powerful.
And folks, Micheal Casey from CoinDesk, Chief Content Officer, I believe, Micheal.
Correct, John.
Was a reporter at the Wall Street Journal for years and years. Teaches still.
Not currently teaching, but was until very recently at MIT.
At MIT, and is on the board at CoinDesk as well, and has written a couple bestsellers, The Truth Machine.
Yep, correct.
And the blockchain, no, what is it? The Future of Everything.
The Age of Cryptocurrency, which
okay.
is the blockchain. The blockchain, the Future of Everything is The Truth Machine. The Age of Cryptocurrency is the first one, that both of them written with Paul Vigna, my former colleague from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, and love the books that
Thank
Paul's
you.
written on it, as well as those by you. When you're looking at a conference like this and seeing, obviously, mass adoption of technology like NFTs, are there certain parallels to other things, as you've already said? Oh, the Magna Carta, John. Yes, this is that's
John.
Instantly what comes to mind for me, the Magna Carta. But outside of that, are there some other comparisons, perhaps a little closer to the 20th century?
Right. Yes. Let's ground this in something closer to home. I think obviously the dot-com boom is something that people talk about, and the thing that I think is most striking about the dot-com boom is people tend to think of it in negative terms, in that it was a bubble that burst, and then all of this pain and loss that came with that. But the reality is that set the stage for the internet that we now know. The one that we, by the way, are busily trying to change, that is the Web 2.0 internet. But it really laid the foundation for something big. And the way that I like to think about it is how when you unlock this level of, first of all, innovation, and secondly, capital, you start to just make it really cheap to build things in a kind of an ecosystem sense. And so, the dot-com boom happened at a time, the serious amount of money that was flowing at that time meant that fiber optic cable was just laid everywhere. It meant that, there was inventions around, mobile computing and the search technology that led to Google. All of that was funded by the bubble itself, right?
Yep.
And that sort of cheap capital thing then became the foundation upon which serious products were built. So, who knows going to win, right? I mean, we talk about this a lot, that it's still an open field, that, not everybody can win. But I do think that what is going on here is laying the foundation for something very, very powerful. And the thing that's really quite significantly more important than the dot-com boom is that, back then it was like, as I said, laying down fiber optic cable and proprietary systems. What's being built through this boom is open source technology. Mm-hmm. So it will just be there for the world to work with as we go
you
forward.
say, and by the way, guys, this is an interesting panel that we got one speaker and two moderators, but Jon Najarian, a lot of you may know him from Halftime Report on CNBC, also a big investor and really understands his space. So they're both really way more expert than me. And no, but we're going to let this be a bit of a conversation because both of them can bring a lot of insight, especially when it comes to the NFT space. Because, again, for all you out there going, property rights. But the reality is, right, property, forgetting the legal IP stuff, this space will define much of what happens. It may be the most important space to do it. Whether you're a creator or not, what we're talking about, and this is where I'm going with this, is how is this notion of property going to change what we consider traditional property and property values and property rights and all that into this Web3 world, and how's that going to impact us in the world we actually live in as well? How big is that?
It's a question for me or for you?
Well,
you first, Michael.
Go
ahead, John.
I'll just say it's a democratization of it for the first part, because what Michael addressed already, folks, was the cost of, for instance, minting an NFT has dropped dramatically. We've got a full stack development team in Austin, Texas, and in Florida, and they work on this stuff all the time. The amount of time it takes has probably dropped by 90% just in the last 6 months. So the democratization, in other words, a lot of what you see out there, not just in the art room right behind the stage here, but in the exhibit hall as well, are folks that are taking advantage of that in a good way. A lot of you are here because you want to take advantage of it, and maybe we'll be buying your NFTs that you wouldn't have had a chance to do if indeed it took that full stack development team and $250,000 or $500,000. So I think it democratizes that and gives artists a lot more control without the same costs, the upfront costs, or trading off how much of the project they'd have to give away to have the team develop it for them, Michael.
Well, I mean, think about, and that's why it's so interesting that this is happening in this city, right? This is the world capital of storytelling, of creation, of creativity. Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm the column coming out tomorrow actually, and I featuring in there the work of Matteo Santoro, who has spoken on this stage I think a couple of days ago. And I looked at his work. He is he's the director, the producer, and the only, I think, actor in his movie that he's funding through NFTs called Sift. And if you look at the quality of the work, this is like he's combined CGI with his own acting skills and this. You know, he's built his own set in his garage, and it's incredibly high production value. I mean, it is really, really good. One guy, right? You look at it and you think, that's got to be some massive studio that's put like, you know, a $200 million budget into this thing. But no, it's a guy in his garage. A
single guy. And I don't know if you know, do you know who he's referring to? Anybody who went to the Steve Aoki thing? All those giant transformer-like things on the walls were Matteo. One guy, literally, it does look like it came out of Universal Studios. Which brings the question up. How many people out here consider themselves some way, shape, or form a content creator? Hands up. It's hard to see out there. Few? Maybe half, good number, right? So the question for content creators, and you mentioned this in the article you're talking about, is what changes for you guys from Web 2 to Web 3? Web 2 was, you know, part of that was anyone could create content. But we found you needed middlemen. So you may make your YouTube show and nobody cares, nobody watches, but it's the best thing ever. You need a platform, someone, you don't have enough viewers, it's not going to be you can't revenue it, so you can't go anywhere with it. The concern that somehow Web 3 is going to create the same problem. You know, that we're going to have OpenSea. You're going to need some gatekeeper eventually emerges, right? That's an issue, right? So the question is, and then again, you own it, but so what? How do we jump over that problem?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, be aware, right? We know this through history. This is what happens. Like, there is a tendency towards monopolies, and so you guys, you know, look after your assets. Be aware of who it is that's telling you what your rights are or they aren't. Read the fine print, that sort of stuff. And think hard about the lessons that we learned from Web 2, which was we gave away our rights. We gave away our data and our content so that these, you know, massive algorithms could manipulate our lives. So be aware of that, lessons. But the reason I'm, you know, a little bit more optimistic is that I think the cycle has sped up. it feels as if in the blockchain world, the pace of innovation is so fast that it's really hard to imagine that something's going to stick around and just sort of dominate everything without being usurped by something else. And I don't necessarily just mean in terms of product and sort of some sort of application, but also just in terms of what's cool and what's interesting. Like, I mean, the power of the Bored Ape Yacht Club is that. It's what do you want to have? But for all you ape holders out there, and I love the project, it's doing incredible things, I'm kind of sick of it already. I feel like it's kind of, I don't know if it carries the cachet it did just a few months ago, right? It's like, you got an ape, really? Is that the coolest thing around now? Again, with all due respect. And so, the cycle seems to me to be a lot faster, and I think that's possibly a good thing in the sense that you just can't hang on to that level of control for too long.
Well, Michael, I have a question then about the article that you wrote, because he let us take a look at it, folks, before it goes to publication. And one of the things that you said in the article, or you were quoting, I think, a young man that was saying, what you've done is you've created a Formula One car, but you don't have a track. So when you talk about the speed, and that's just an analogy, of course, but when you talk about the speed, now people can develop these, exactly as Rob said, fantastic things in Web3, but how do, are they ahead of their time? Because that's a curse too. I'm sure you've had to live it, that may you always be ahead of your time is a curse, because that means whoever's coming next is the one that's going to profit from it, not you.
Mm-hmm. Look, we've seen, the early NFT inventions, just, CryptoKitties could have been it, right? Mm-hmm. And it turned out not to be. So yes, I think that's very true. That reference was actually a reference to the underlying blockchain technology, right? That we still don't know how to scale Ethereum. That we have gas fees, what they are. That we have essentially massive problems with congestion, which leads to the centralization problem. Because the only way you can efficiently actually mint everything and transact everything is to have somebody centralized control over it. So it is a concern that we are getting ahead of ourselves here, sort of just driving as fast as we can on the Formula One car that doesn't have a track to run on. However, I think what's also interesting about this moment, this is what this article is really about, is it may be a moot point. Not to say that we obviously need the system to scale. We definitely need developers to sort of push Ethereum, push all of these different layer one apps, layer one protocols to where they need to be. But it is to say that it's generated so much enthusiasm and so much sort of creativity around both the content and the new business models that it seems to have taken on a life of its own, and that at some point the tech will catch up. And if when it does, hopefully, we're then able to make sure that it's not a world in which some big monopoly is now in charge of it all. So
that's a great point. And John, too, in the space, you've done some raises for NFTs that have been huge and big, and you're seeing the synergy that creates. So, Michael, when you say that, my first reaction is, right. Is it possible that what everyone here is doing, what this world is doing, actually changes the course of history from what happened before? Because I'm a victim of I did one of the first live stream shows on TV.com, back in the late 90s, and the streaming technology was too slow. Larry Namer, E-Network started this thing. It was too slow. We couldn't make it because the technology wasn't there, but the technology that ended up getting there was very centralized. So when you say hopefully we avoid it, is it possible that this ownership and this creative wave actually pushes that to a different outcome?
Well, let me just ask you a question. When you launched that live stream product, how much, and you don't have to answer it in absolute details, but how much liquid cash were you sitting on?
Larry Namer was probably sitting on, I don't know, a couple $100,000. Not a lot. Okay,
not a lot, right? The quote that I led this article with that is out tomorrow from I'm not even going to name him because I'm not even sure whether it'll be in there. But anyway, the lead was, what's the definition of punk? This is from a guy who ran music managers. And he said, the most punk thing in the world, but the most punk thing you can have is $1 billion. And it's an encapsulation of this idea that now you really can tell the man to go F himself. That there is this capacity to just not be beholden to the machine if you are sitting on wealth. And that is the incredible thing about crypto, right? Set aside the NFT boom. There is so much money in the hands of people who would never, without this technology, have had that money. The stories of wealth creation that date back to the early days of Bitcoin, but then Ethereum, and then everything else, it is wealth creation like we've never seen before. So the very presence of that pool of capital being applied to this and not being applied to the old Web 2 analog world changes the dynamic, I think.
100% shifts it, right? So the question I'm going to toss to both of you is, what drives the stake into the heart of this space? As NFTs explode, the idea, it's a bubble. Everybody hears that. It's a bubble. It's a bubble. It's going to pass. And even within the well-versed crypto community, there's concerns. Could this be some kind of an NFT bubble? That issue's been raised a lot, right? What's the simple answer why this isn't? I don't think it's a bubble. I don't think this goes away. I think it's partly because NFTs are a source of liquidity. I think they're going to play into so many other things that will simply drive maybe the thing you're talking about, the sheer amount of money coming in, that will trigger the innovation. But what prevents that from happening? This just being another big bubble that goes boom and everybody goes, oh well, that wasn't really all that.
I would say, and my partners at the Zombie Collective, the hat I'm wearing is the Zombie Collective, we have helped launch a few NFT projects. In fact, we have brought out the largest to date minting of traditional art in NFT, and it was $16 million in 3 hours. And the artist, Brendan Murphy, who is part of that, we called it the Bungie Project, because he calls these 8-foot spacemen he makes, sculptures, he calls them Bungie. So, and he has beautiful things, they look like they're made out of chrome, and they've got writing on them, and it's fabulous. You should look it up. The traditional art is amazing. The NFTs, when you look at the A-list people that have bought his art, costs you somewhere between $50,000 for a painting to $300,000 or $400,000 for an 8-foot Bungie spaceman. Now, he has thousands, perhaps, somewhere between 900 and 1,000 people who have bought his art over the years and are fans, collectors, and so forth. When you drop 10,000 tokens, NFTs, all of a sudden you have broadened, your collector base dramatically. Now, granted, not all of them can afford that $50,000 to $400,000 spaceman, but what you've done is you've basically got a one-on-one relationship with a much bigger audience for whatever Brendan does next. And the same thing is true with music. The same thing is true with people that are like Mark Cuban the other day when he's talking about doing Fireside and this TV show and so forth. You don't have to deal with nearly as many middlemen that slow down the process and or keep the artist from being able to interact directly with the people that have bought their art, whatever that art might be, music, pictures, scripts, movies, whatever.
Absolutely. I think another way just to augment that is to think about the kinds of people it brings in, because art traditionally had the ultimate gatekeepers, gallery owners, and the Christies, the Sotheby's of this world, and an incredibly elite way of approaching this. The only people that could possibly understand the value of something was somebody steeped in that world, right? But this isn't. This is a completely different bunch of punks. These are crypto people. This is a very different world, and therefore, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So the very idea that what is cool, what is interesting, what is beautiful, that's being shifted by this, because the market itself is composed of completely different people. So I think this is that's what's also, I think, like the aesthetics we're seeing now in this digital creation phase, we haven't seen them before because we've never had that market there to actually express and, assert the value of those things. But now that it's being unleashed, this is what the new aesthetic is.
And it redefines to me what property is as well. You mentioned Christie's. I read an article and it had a quote from a well-known Christie's auctioneer who was like, why would anybody want to buy something that isn't there? Referring to NFTs. To your point, they were not only gatekeepers, they defined what art could be. When you want to buy something that isn't there, a bunch of idiots out here buying crap that doesn't exist. Totally doesn't get it. Doesn't this in some way redefine the very nature of property?
Well, I think the analogy I like to think of is, what does a well-regarded philanthropist or an art collector do? Imagine, you're a super rich guy and you own, a Picasso. What do you typically do? I mean, you might hang it in the home, but a lot of times you'll display it in a museum, right? And it'll be acknowledged that this is in the collection of Micheal Casey. I don't own any Picassos sitting in the Louvre or anything, just for full disclosure. But, if I did, that's what I would like to do, right? I mean, if there is this mindset that says I am going to be a patron of the arts, I will own it, and that's a valuable thing. But what I really want is to share it with the world. And so, what is ownership in that sense? It's not control. It's not something that I have tactile, physical control of. It's really kind of bragging rights, but also enabling. I'm an enabler of this thing, right? And I like to think generously, because I think obviously NFTs is also a speculation game, but that's fine, that drives the capital. But in many respects, it is that we call them collectors. They are there to support the artist. And yes, I can still right-click onto the image that somebody else has bought with an NFT, but I can't claim to be the guy who is enabling that. I'm not the one that is supporting as a benefactor to the artist. And that's a powerful thing. I think that's a really positive thing to encourage in society, that if you've got wealth, you can give back, actually, by supporting the creative process and maybe get some upside out of the speculative part at the same time.
And isn't there something about a collective ownership that comes out of this too? I mean, in a way, sure, the original creator is the owner, but you create a community, a collective community of ownership, which goes against the traditional notion of my property. It is my ideas, and I do retain right to that, but I can share that right with others who can benefit from it in a way we've never done before.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I want to be clear, right? You could still have a very kind of litigious, restrictive approach to this. Like, that's all. Again, one of the issues we need to resolve with this property rights question is, how do we define IP? But the reality is the ethos is not that. And that's one of the great things about Yuga Labs and what they've done with the Bored Apes is this. They recognize that the value of the core concept, the IP of the Bored Ape Yacht Club itself, is greatly enhanced by letting everybody else who owns an ape do whatever they want with it, right? So the antithesis of really what a lot of the studios in this town have done for years, which is to say, this is mine and how dare you. Naomi Klein's book, No Logo, talks about Disney sending in people into children's birthday parties to arrest the animator, the performer dressed in an unlicensed Snow White costume, right? This absurd idea that you own this IP and you act litigiously against it. The mindset is completely different here. So I think that that sort of genie is out of the bottle, and that is the future of NFTs, which is also another big, profound change. So yes, absolutely, it's a completely different way of thinking about it. You've got not only this idea of, okay, you've got this and you can build something with it, you can take this into your metaverse and you can build these communities. There's DAOs, which go the other side of it, which is you can collectively own one thing together, right? And they're all feeding off each other. It's quite a profound shift, for sure.
And then the augmented side of this too, Michael, where, for instance, Bored Ape Yacht Club that you mentioned, all of a sudden somebody is making Adidas for those Bored Apes. Somebody's making jewelry for those Bored Apes, and thus making it a little more rare or making it even more special by some of the enhancements that they can do to these NFTs. And I think that is going to be coming our way in a much bigger way in the next 3 months, 6 months, year. You'll see a lot more enhancement to an existing NFT that will change it.
Well, the very idea of a brand has changed, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's, I think I don't know who saw the Doodles thing. I was at South by Southwest and they had their launch down in Austin, right? And Doodles, you walk in there like, what is this? What are we actually seeing here? And I think it was the launch of a brand, right? In the same way that the apes are also, I would say, a brand, but a very, very different concept than, say, Disney or any of the mainstream brands that we're thinking about. It's a brand that has this collective participation in it. So yeah, I do think that and then what happens is like, okay, there's a partnership between this brand and that brand, and it's building the ecosystem even wider when it does that, because these two communities now are working together, right?
So we're just about out of time, but I want to let the audience get your last thought on something, because we started the conference with Mark Cuban saying property in the metaverse is not like property in the real world, because real world is about location. Metaverse, it's about what's on that location. And, people always you said the Snoop thing, someone else said it, the Snoop thing, well, if you're next to Snoop, well, okay, for a minute until you're doing something crappy, and then I don't want to be there, I'll just jump to the other side of infinity in the metaverse for something else. Are we going to see a difference in property in the metaverse? Just a takeaway thought there.
I definitely think that the geography thing is challenging, because proximity matters when it takes a lot longer to walk from my place to John's as opposed to yours, right? And it doesn't matter in that digital existence. However, you can't get away from the fact that this is a bit of a mindfuck, right? We're all just kind of constructing in our heads the notion of proximity, and that may be just enough. We don't know, right? I mean, I do think it's a really interesting question, that are we replicating the physical world in that place, or are we, actually constructing a very different idea of geography and proximity? The very idea of community, right, is now something that is much more connected with what I'm interested in, who I am, than which town I'm in, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think that we probably push away from, I don't think owning property next to Snoop's place is really a great bet. However, perhaps just that simple fact and the way we imagine these things and that stricture of the way we think may continue to make us believe that we are actually next door to it. I really don't know. It's a mind
interesting
fuck. Question.
It's a mind fuck, and on that note, we're done. It's all a mind fuck, but enjoy it, because we're all going to figure out how to make something cool out of it. Micheal Casey, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Jon
Michael.
Najarian.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.